Windsor Castle is the largest and oldest inhabited castle in the world. It's an official residence of His Majesty the King and site of great state occasions such as state banquets and royal weddings. The castle was founded by William the Conqueror. First recorded in 1070, it was probably constructed soon after the Norman conquest of 1066. Initially, it wasn't intended to be a royal residence, but a defensive fortress, and its position on the banks of the River Thames was most likely to control and defend a bridge or other river crossing. It would also have served as a military base from which to suppress any unrest in the local population. The original castle would have been a traditional Norman motte and bailey castle, with a timber-frame tower on top of the motte, which was the large mound of earth, which at Windsor still survives right at the heart of the castle for almost 1,000 years. The bailey was a fortified courtyard at its base. The next major development was brought about by William the Conqueror's youngest son, Henry I, who added 2 additional baileys, known as the Upper Ward and the Lower Ward today. And that marks the moment the castle first becomes a royal residence. In the late 12th century, Henry II replaced the wooden fortifications with stone, so building the first round tower and setting the curtain wall, which has essentially defined the footprint of Windsor Castle up until today. The first large-scale chapel to be built within Windsor Castle was constructed by Henry III beginning in 1240. This was the great medieval building monarch responsible for Westminster Abbey as we see it today. But unfortunately, his chapel here at Windsor, dedicated to St. Edward the Confessor, only survives in fragments. 100 years later, Edward III spent vast sums of money transforming the royal lodgings into one of the most magnificent royal palaces in medieval Europe, the area that today we still call the State Apartments. He built a great kitchen and a 14th century undercroft to store vats of beer and wine, which today we use as our cafe. And this serviced great feasts which took place in the room directly above, here in St. George's Hall. When Henry VIII came to the throne in 1509, he almost immediately began to rebuild the impressive gate tower entrance, which today is known as Henry VIII Gate. It was also Henry who completed the rebuild of St. George's Chapel that had begun by Edward IV in the 15th century, but Henry completed it with its spectacular fan-vaulted ceilings. Henry VIII was buried in St. George's Chapel, as were many successive monarchs over the centuries, until most recently Queen Elizabeth II.
In the 1670s, with his architect Hugh May, Charles II embarked on a huge rebuilding project, turning the medieval castle into a modern building with apartments for the king and the queen. A series of rooms, a new way of meeting the monarch and their consort, called an enfilade. The paintings that you can see today in the Queen's Ballroom are all by Van Dyck, and this led in the 19th century to that room being called the Van Dyck Room. There's depictions of Charles II with his siblings as a child in this space. In 1820, when George IV came to the throne after the long reign of his father, George III, he decided to refurnish private apartments into semi-state rooms that, although still very grand and beautifully coloured and gilded, were meant for more private entertaining and dancing. And they were furnished in beautiful silks, there's reds, blues, and beautiful oak carving designed by Geoffrey Wyatville in a recreation of the medieval Gothic period. George IV was a really keen patron of new English furniture and purchasing historic French furniture from the art market. This suite of furniture by the English furniture makers Morel and Seddon are part of a suite that is in 4 or 5 different colours of upholstery throughout several staterooms here at Windsor and also at Buckingham Palace in London. You can tell it's the same suite of furniture because the giltwood is all the same design, but here in the crimson drawing room, the upholstery is in crimson silk to match the wall hangings. Windsor Castle was incredibly important to Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. They spent their honeymoon here in Lancaster Tower, and every one of their married Christmases with their eventual 9 children. In this painting by Winterhalter, you can see them with their eldest daughter, Vicky, the Princess Royal. So you can imagine the importance of this place as a sense of family, as well as a castle operating for the great events of state. The castle played a very important part in the Second World War. It's where Princesses Elizabeth, later Queen Elizabeth II, and Margaret spent most of their time. For Christmases between 1941 and 1944, the princesses put on pantomimes to raise money for the Royal Household Wool Fund, which would use wool to knit warm clothes for the armed forces. The princesses would wear fancy dress, as would the rest of the cast. And behind the huge full-length portraits by Sir Thomas Lawrence in the Waterloo Chamber hang surprisingly modern backdrops for those Christmas pantomimes, painted by the future film director Claude Wattham.
In 1992, a devastating fire broke out in the northeast corner of Windsor Castle. The fire broke out in Queen Victoria's private chapel when a lamp overheated, came into contact with a curtain which then ignited, and then the flames spread instantaneously through the roof voids in multiple directions and was utterly unstoppable. The fire destroyed 9 staterooms and multiple other service rooms in that part of the castle. But very soon afterwards, a committee was established to oversee the restoration of this magnificent site, chaired by Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. In deciding how to restore the rooms, the committee decided that some were to be taken back to how they had originally looked historically. One of these is the Grand Reception Room. The enormous malachite urn in the window, covered in the thin veneer of the semi-precious stone malachite, was too heavy to remove, and the intensity of the heat and the coldness of the water meant that the veneer pinged off to form heaps on the floor, which had to be painstakingly restored piece by piece. Some of the other rooms, such as Queen Victoria's private chapel, were completely changed. Rather than restoring the chapel in that spot, it was decided to turn it into a lobby area, the Lantern Lobby, using a modern interpretation of the Gothic style. So too St. George's Hall, which was rebuilt in the medieval tradition using original techniques to create a modern take on the medieval past. Today, Windsor Castle is open to the public and visitors can see for themselves how over 1,000 years successive monarchs have shaped the castle according to changing tastes and requirements. But unlike some historical sites frozen in time, this is a working palace. It still hosts great events of state. It still serves as a home for the monarch and members of the royal family, exactly as it had done 900 years ago.